evening, everybody. You're all very welcome to another programme with us, Social Rights Ireland and the Pat O'Donnell Socialist Republican Forum. And tonight we're very glad to welcome our guest speaker, Diarmaid Ó'Chadla from Cork, who is here to talk under the banner of tonight's title, which is Democracy. For whom? That's the question. And we're going to do it as always, talk through the conversation, which isn't scripted or rehearsed or anything like that, but we try to analyse through an anti-imperialist, a working class lens, and that's why our panellists Barry Murray and Tommy McKerney of the Pat O'Donnell Socialist Republican Forum are here to offer some analysis and commentary too, alongside comrades Morgan O'Chadla from Cork. He's our Cork correspondent now, Stephen in Galway, and joined with us tonight in the Peel, Dara Cogley as well, who has been a guest speaker on the programme before. So thank you very much, Diarmaid. I'll ask you to unmute and everyone to make sure they are muted. And if you'd like to go ahead and just introduce the topic as you see it from your point of view.
Thanks very much. Yeah. Thank you for having me on the forum. Debate and discussion is needed worldwide, but in Ireland in particular, and I like to try to focus on Ireland, given that that's where we live. And the topic is hitting the nail on the head in that the question of democracy is the key of the modern times. And I myself have been kind of active in, I think, in this arena since the late 1970s. And we used to organise meetings here in Cork to support the prisoners on the dirty protests in the north and so on. So from that time, I've been trying to grapple with these issues. You know, we all, I'm presuming here, we're all in favour of national liberation, that the people should control the state that we live in and so on. And loosely, this has been called democracy. And I think it's time that we put things in modern definition, for want of a better way of saying it, because lots of people talk about democracy. For example, the United States has a party that says it's the Democratic Party. In Ireland, we have all kinds of political parties, all of whom say they're democratic and they're for democracy. We even have parties who say they're socialist and for the working class, and we have parties who say they're Republican and adhere to wolf tone and all these things. But it's all nonsense because people use these names and definitions that are very subjective and can mean anything. And we can have, like, we've a lot of people gathering to this debate tonight, and I don't wish to do a test, but I would say if we went to each individual and said, give me the definition of socialism or what you believe to be democracy, I bet you will come up with a whole lot of different things. And it's very important, I think, that if we're advancing in the arena of politics and say we're for democracy in Ireland, well, we need to be able to say, well, what is that? Otherwise, we have 10 people in a room and we're all talking, vigorously about what we believe democracy is, but we're not exchanging ideas and we're not progressing the debate because we're coming from different perspectives. So in my view, things need a modern definition. And by modern, of our times, and it needs to be an expression that's useful. Like you can express things, in a scientific way that might be utterly useless to humanity because no one understands what on earth you're talking about. So ideas have to have power in that they're of some use other than pure academia. So I and some others have been advancing or trying to deal with this specific issue of modern definitions now since the early 80s, really. And I think it narrows down to one phrase, and that is the empowerment of the people. Either the people are empowered or we're not. And this, in the modern times, in my view, even goes beyond, someone might say, oh, democracy is subject to class. There's bourgeois democracy and proletarian democracy and all kinds of other names one might try to look at it from. But I think boiling it down to its fundamental is important. And then it becomes a useful tool in the struggle to actually liberate humanity, if you like, or emancipate humanity from whatever you think is oppressing it. And I think what I've been advocating is that people should look at the issue of empowerment and judge things by that yardstick. Is what the government is doing in Leinster House or Westminster or Stormont or wherever, does it empower the people? Are the people the ones who are empowered? So, like when we have issues of state policy, like it's an old tenet, people would say, the state has no right to enact policy contrary to the wishes of the people. I think that's a truism, if you like, of democracy. So how do we judge? I mean, I see, Roisin, in your background, you're talking about neutrality and sovereignty and peace. These are all things I have absolutely no doubt the vast majority of the people of Ireland are well in favour of and strongly in favour of even. Yet our government is treating these issues as if it's mere a subjective thing for themselves to decide upon. Equally, in the management of our economy, in the question of national unity or reunification, all of these things are treated by narrow interest groups without reference to the population or without any effort to ascertain, well, what is the will of the people? And of course, everyone says, oh, we're speaking for the people. But how do we ascertain that will of the people? And are there objective things we can say that, yes, this reflects the will of the people? And what should our policy, our national policy, and what should the policy of those who advocate for positive change, for democracy, for renewal, and so on, what should our policy be? This is where we need to have a modern definition. And like, since we're in a socialist Republican forum, perhaps people, I know lots of people on the streets of Cork, and I'm sure it happens in Dublin. People go around telling us we must have socialism and this is what it's going to be. I don't think sloganeering of this type helps because it doesn't explain anything. Because again, you have to sit down and say, well, what's socialism? What do you mean by that? And you can have, again, the 10 people in the room, and each of them will have very strongly held opinions as to what this socialism is. Therefore, we'll have a big argument, an academic argument about what's the right variation of socialism. And in the meantime, we do absolutely nothing. And I think it's famously written on Marx's tomb that the philosophers have interpreted the world in various ways. The point, however, is to change it. So unless the philosophies and the theories that are bandied about actually assist the struggle of the people, then we should just put them to one side. They don't serve us. We should be very pragmatic in our theories. Like they must be of assistance to us. They must address reality. Otherwise, they're no good. So I'm in favour of modern definitions. Let's have some thinking and debate as to what's a modern definition for democracy? What's a modern definition of the Republican ideal? Like I know in the lead up to the 1916 Rising, Pearse himself wrote, is it in one of his famous essays, perhaps The Sovereign People, but he explained how the Republican ideal, tone, yeah, was it in Ghosts, actually? He talks about the legacy being left by the fathers of the Irish nation and began with Tone's contribution to that. And he isolated Wolfe Tone, I think James Fintan Lawler, Mitchell. He gave Parnell a favourable mention. I forget who else. He didn't include, for example, Emmett as amongst the great fathers of the nation because Emmett didn't really, while heroic though he was, he didn't contribute something new, whereas Tone did, Lawler did. And up through history, they added to our understanding of this Republican ideal. They were consistent with it looking back, but they added something fresh in for their time, as did Connolly and Pearse and the men and women who marched out in 1916. They added a fresh thing to it, but they were consistent with the past. So today, what are we going to add? Are we going to make a contribution to this movement, this ongoing struggle and unfinished business, but one of our time? We can't refight the battles of 1916 or 1922, 23. Those are done. And though heroic efforts have been made in recent decades in the six counties, I think we need a modern definition. So anyway, that's my let that be an opener, and you can't shoot me because I'm too far. But I will take criticism, and in fact I'll welcome it because I have thought about this question in depth, and I will take any hammering that's coming to me. So lay on that duff, as they say.
We're not that bad, Diarmaid. You brought up the question of language really here as well,
Yeah,
and how language, yeah, like a lot of things evolves and words can become redundant. They certainly become redundant if they are not put into action. Revolutionary theory on its own will not a revolution make,
yeah,
and yet there can be no revolution without revolutionary theory. When it comes to, we can be very purist about, well, according to Marxist Leninist, democracy is, and according to capitalist, democracy is. We could change the term and we could modernize the language, but would we still have a definition that could be agreed upon? The problems that we would see an awful lot of is how our language is actually being stolen, Diarmaid,
yeah,
by the liberal left. All
yeah,
beautiful sounding words like human rights and justice and peace. The word peace there, like you mentioned the words on the background of the Zoom thing behind me, neutrality, sovereignty, peace. Like, what does that mean? Because neutrality to people in the north, people like me, it's a joke. There is no neutrality. Others are down here saying, let's save neutrality. Others will say defend neutrality, which those verbs in themselves will tell you that there's different definitions of what the word neutrality actually is. And sovereignty, somebody will say protect our sovereignty, while others will be like, we demand sovereignty. These are words, they're lofty words. Peace as well. Like people say there's peace in the north now since the Good Friday Agreement. Others will say there is no peace when you have the highest rates of poverty than we've ever had, child poverty than we've ever had before, or the highest rates of suicide in the 6 counties than we've ever had before. How is that peace? So the definitions we could find, a modern word for democracy. Number one, even if we replaced it with a more acceptable modern word, would anything change? A rose by any other name is still a rose.
yeah. I'm not suggesting that we change the word democracy. We should keep it. But my point is, how do we define it?
Fine.
Because I've had people come to talk, we'll say, and they start explaining to me about Plato and this and electoral democracy and all these things. To me, it usually amounts to so much waffle because the bottom line has to be, in my book, do the people rule or don't we? Do the people of Ireland decide how Ireland is run or do we not? It's like an on or off switch. Either we do or we don't. Having it that the people are the deciders of the policy of our state or whatever form that is, that's what, in my view, democracy is. If the people don't rule, then we don't live in a democracy. That means someone else is ruling over us.
Mhm.
So I think, like, I'm not suggesting I would never want to yield ground to any of these charlatans who masquerade as Republican or as socialism or whatever. There are people who are pretending everywhere. However, to try to bring us together, like I would predict you will never have a mass uprising amongst the Irish people that are agreed that this is for socialism,
Mhm.
as the debate currently exists, because no one knows what it is, and it's a hotbed for ensuring you'll have arguments and split and so on. So again, rather than having a debate dragged off to disarm the people, let's have it in a framing that empowers people to actually do something. So like when I attend meetings, which I've done lots of, and explain, look, we're for the empowerment of the people. Like who's going to put their hands up and say no? Pretty much they want to be really bad is to object to that. If I go into a room and say, let's have socialism, we will have constant argument, constant argument. And And that's not to say that, like, I have a vision of what that is, right? I don't think it's wrong. I think it's right. But do I want to have to test everybody's ideological soundness before I sit down with them? Because if I do, then I'm getting nowhere fast, in my opinion. I'm not saying there's no need for scientific debate and study. There is great need for that. But when it comes into the field of building a movement for the people, the slogans must be one that, number one, isn't contradictory to the scientific investigation, if you like, of what socialism is or isn't. And it needs to be consistent also with Ireland's own tradition, because we have experience in this country as a people, invaluable, unparalleled experience in rebellion and social causes, if you like. We must be consistent with that history, like consistent with Tone and all these people who did contribute massively to the debate. But we must do it in a modern sense. So no,
Which
I'm
is
not trying to
right. Yeah,
replace the language, but trying
yeah,
to put smock on it, if you like.
yeah. Well, we would argue that the need for an anti-imperialist movement, but a working class anti-imperialist movement
Yeah,
is necessary. At this stage,
it
I'm going
is.
to bring Tommy in maybe and then Barry.
Thanks, Jim, and I think that was an excellent presentation, very enlightening, very helpful. Certainly, I think the key aspect that I took from it is the concentration on empowerment of the people. Without empowering the people, we have nothing. And that's one of the huge problems we have at the moment, that we're told we have a democracy because we're allowed to vote. As I think somebody, Connolly or someone said one time, that allowed to vote every few years for rascals that misgovern us. We don't really have power in our hands, and I think that's exemplified at the moment by the sleight of hand that the Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael coalition are pulling over Article 5 to try and stop us voting on neutrality, because they're telling us that they have a mandate to do so, contrary to all the evidence that the Irish people are totally dedicated to neutrality. We're seeing the US Army and its Air Force flying out of Shannon. We're seeing different contributions from Dublin to the European Union's PESCO military alliance, and they're going to now do away with the triple lock, which will exemplifies how little power the people have. But empowerment is a key phrase in my mind in this debate. How we bring about empowerment, I think that's the next thing we have to do. It's one thing to say we want empowerment, and I agree with you, and I'm not trying to be dismissive, but we've got to figure out some method of how we empower the people in a practical sense, because without that, then again, we're back to the aspiration rather than the practical application. There are other examples throughout the world perhaps where we can see how empowerment comes, not necessarily by giving people a vote every few years to vote on which group of rascals will take power, but to have day-to-day influence, to have meaningful authority, to really empower the people, because with it, I think the thing with empowerment then, it's one of the first steps towards building a socialized economy, which truly will empower the people when they have control over the means of production, distribution and exchange. That is final empowerment, and that really is democracy.
Thank you, Tommy. And at this point, before I come back to you, Diarmaid, the question I suppose Tommy is putting Barry to all of us, or just the invitation to think about, is the empowerment. How do you realise that in practical terms? Because it's a great word, it's a very important, necessary. You started with it, Diarmaid, and now how do people feel empowered? How do they become empowered? Especially at this moment when the highest number of people ever decided not to vote in the last general election. So they're clearly pissed off and don't believe that there's any power to be had or gained through the ballot box. So what do we need to do? Not feel empowered, because there's a lot of things you can do that make you feel powerful in a very liberal sense. They'll say, oh, do this and you'll feel like a powerful woman. But that's not real power.
I mean, what Diarmaid is talking about there is some form of participatory or direct democracy versus representative, or what's known as bourgeois democracy. And Tommy touched on it there. I mean, the democracy that we think we have, and most people think they have by voting every 4 or 5 years, I mean, we know for sure isn't democracy at all. We know that empowerment within capitalism is not empowerment at all either, any more than freedoms are. What we're talking about here is not human rights. We're talking about the rights of humanity, which is an entirely different concept. And if we go to the stage where we sit down to do something practical in our areas, then what we have to do is set up people's councils and turn existing community groups and community campaigns into people's councils that confronts and exposes and works with the first level of what is known as bourgeois democracy, and that is local councils. But that the local councils become directed by the people in the areas. That's an entirely different thing than electing people to do the work for you. That's not the way it works. There is no democracy in parliaments or councils. There can't be. And the reason for that is that all councils, all parliaments are the product of capitalism. They are the product of the means of production. They're the product of the means of distribution, means of production and distribution and control. And until that position is changed, you can't have democracy. It's not possible. Any scientific examination will tell you that. Now, there's another problem, and that problem is some of the things that Diarmaid points to is that, and it's a major problem, is that people don't believe, unfortunately, that democracy is their business. They don't think that it's everybody in Ireland, and we'll just speak about Ireland for the time being. Everybody in Ireland thinks that it's the TD's job, or it's the MP's job, or it's the councillor's job. They have no concept whatsoever. And of course, power doesn't want to allow that either. No person has ever been taught that they have power. They've been taught the direct opposite from the day they were born, that they have to be subservient to everything and everybody. We used to talk about years ago, subservient to the priest, subservient to the local bank manager, subservient to the local businessman, and certainly subservient to your school teachers. That's a form of thinking. That's a form of brainwashing. It's the hegemony of power, it's control. And that's something that we have to break down. Now, there never has been, contrary to popular belief, there never has been socialism or communism anywhere in the world, ever. That's a myth. What has been tried and attempted is the building of socialism and communism. Now, that's an entirely different thing. And that's also where we need to start. We need to start with building for a new democracy. And democracy is the key. We don't have democracy. There's no democracy in Ireland. There can't be democracy as long as 1 or 2% of the population controls the means and production of wealth. That can't happen. Now, how long will that take? What will that take? Well, the first thing it takes is knowledge empowerment. And I think that's our job. And I think it's important that we do that. I think it's important that we speak about democracy. I think it's important that we speak about peace and sovereignty and unity within Ireland. And we also need to explain what that means as we go along. We don't need to get into deep ideological arguments about whether this type of socialism or that type of socialism or the other kind of socialism or communism is right or wrong. Because that's a rabbit warren, a deliberate rabbit warren in some cases, which is left to confuse people and also to lead you down false paths. We just need to simply say to the people, you need to be in control of your life, and you can be. As Marx said, philosophers talk about how the world should be, but it takes humans to design it and do it and actually put it into practice. And that's where we need to start.
Diarmaid, I'll bring you back in just if there's any response or comment that you'd like to make with relation to Tommy and Barry's.
Yeah, I take positive from what both Tommy and Barry have outlined, and just for the sake of underlying the point I was making, I mean, Barry, you made a statement that there never was socialism anywhere in the world to date.
No.
And look, you may well be right. I don't want to have an argument with you about it, but you know, I'm sure you must know, putting that out there, you're going to start immediate arguments, and honest people are going to get very hot under the collar debating that point with you. And my point is that debate is useless. Who's it going to assist? Nobody. And again, I'm not denying there isn't a need to academically examine the unfolding processes of history and political movements and so on. Sure, there's a role for doing that. It becomes a problem when people, if you like, stick that in as part of the package to build this massive movement in the communities, as you've outlined, in local councils and so on, where people are striving to deal with their day-to-day problems. A movement does need to be shaped and directed so as that local councils do exist. I mean, if you like the Soviets held power in their own areas and arena, if you like, in the early Soviet period. But so we need to have that here, but the process of building that cannot be academic debate. It can't be people claiming and holding on my definition of this is the right thing and so on. So I believe, like, if you look, what was the proposition of the national movement which led to 1916 and the War of Independence and so on? What was the proposition? Like, people who joined the Irish Volunteers, they signed an undertaking which I think was 3 or 4 lines long, right? Like, it wasn't a convoluted thing. Irish people are intelligent. I'm speaking only because I have experience of the Irish people. We know generally our history. People, in my opinion, while most working class people in Ireland today aren't bothered with voting, they're saying, what's the point? And they're right. Voting's never helped us at all, right? But I wouldn't yield that grounds to them either. So we need a proposition which can bring people together to fight for all the diverse rights that they're concerned with. For example, for neutrality, for peace, for national unification, for economic rights, to control the vast resources that Ireland has, that they should be channeled and harnessed to serve the people of Ireland. We need something that does that. And I think the concept of democracy, or lack of it, is the key to this. Didn't Lenin say, in any situation, there's a key which, if you grasp that link to the chain, you can control the whole chain. And in my opinion, that key in modern Ireland is democracy. Now, that's saying it very simply because, as you've pointed out, how can you have democracy when the economy is owned by such a tiny percentage of an elite? And absolutely true. But let's try to inculcate a culture amongst the people that it's theirs, it's ours. Like someone I was chatting with the other day, and we were talking about all humans are created equal. And I agree with that concept. But if you take a baby born in Ireland today, right, and they're supposedly equal stakeholders with all the fellow citizens of Ireland, we'll say. But the problem is when that child has come onto the island of Ireland, already private interests are grabbed up and have no trespass signs saying this is private. So someone has been allowed to grab it. So I think we need to inculcate a sense of entitlement, for want of a better word, of ownership amongst the people, that we should realise this is ours. And to paraphrase Connolly's song, our demands most moderate are, we only want the earth, everything. So in Ireland, the Irish people own everything, no exception. Nobody has a title deed except that it is subject to the will of the people. Everything is belonging to the people. So in my view, this business of empowerment, that for me, you can have an equation, democracy equals the empowerment of the people. If we have this position, then it is for the people to decide how they will dispense with all the resources they have. If the people think it's a good idea to leave a minority own all the means of production, then that's the prerogative of the people. But let's have faith in the people. Let's believe them that they will act in their own interests, and they will. So I think those who have taken a platform, like I would suggest everybody in this debate, I think we all have a responsibility to try to present this key issue in Ireland, to present it in a packaging that will serve the people of Ireland. If we have packaging which hides it or confuses it or places preconditions on individual that they have to be of sound ideological sense before they can have any say, then we're just going to add to the confusion and be a hindrance rather than a help. So I think we need all these local councils through which the people can act. And the people know there's really no big mystery in the area of policy. Like, people know they want to have decent health and education services, decent, meaningful employment. People don't want something for nothing, but that we would look after those who need looking after. And we don't want to wage wars or contribute to other people's waging of wars to oppress other peoples. We don't want that. In fact, if we can give a helping hand to humanity on a worldwide basis, which Irish people have always done, like more so than anybody I can think of, actually, then we should do all those things. And we have the resources to do it. So I said modern definitions. We need to have a modern definition for whatever you might like to call it, the socialist ideal, or a modern a modern theory of socialism, if you like. It needs to be packaged so as that it's of use. Packaging it so that it's a hindrance is no good. It doesn't, and there are lots of people out there, I know lots of people in this forum will agree, there are lots of people out there who are packaging these ideas in the most unhelpful way. In fact, almost, I've seen public forums and someone says, these banners with their red banners come along, I'm getting out of here, right? Because it's left such bad taste amongst the people. And that's not to say we accept that. It would never yield to the ground. But we don't have to let, if you like, the enemies of the people set the agenda for our discussion. We should set our own agenda, advance the ideas that are helpful in. Yes, there is class struggle waging. Yes, the Irish people demand their national liberation. Yes, we demand our economic rights. All those things. We need to advance that movement. And people who have looked at this in the intellectual sense have a duty to use that intellect to package this so that it becomes a useful tool in the hands of the mass of people. And they will use it. People in Ireland, in my opinion, have shown over the decades that they are ready to rise up. In fact, they're wishing for it. They're wishing that a force would emerge in the country which would articulate their demand. But it doesn't arrive. Instead, you have all these movements which emerge, and maybe they're inspired by bad elements to begin with, or they get hijacked along the way. And people are fed up being led by the nose, marching up the mountain and down again to no end. But they're waiting. I understand, my experience is when we speak to people directly, you can calm down the excitement and so on. People are seething with anger against the system, against how anti-human it is, how anti-Irish it is. People are wanting to build a movement to revolt. So it requires only for those who can see this to do what's necessary, put away the pet idea or repackaged ideology that someone inherited from the Great October Revolution or whatever, and let's have modern definitions for what will address the people today. So I think it's crying out for that. And the day it happens, it won't be a question of saying, I want people to protest. You won't be able to hold back because the people will unleash such anger. And they're crying out to do that. Like recent examples, I think, were very much so during the campaign against the water privatisation efforts some years ago. But before that, Tommy, you remember the hunger strikes. Like, had there been a proper initiative amongst the people at that time, I believe Ireland could have been liberated completely. But that wasn't the case. At various points in our history, during the tax marches back in the 70s before that, people had come up in massive numbers, determined to have change, only to be sold out and led up the garden path. So the people in Ireland, the people in Ireland are too conservative, they'll come lazy. This is not true. This is a slur against the people. the people are anxious to fight the fight that needs to be done. They know that the tradition in their own very own families has been one of revolution. They know this. People haven't forgotten. And this is, I believe, exists in every family in Ireland because of the way, families, cross over and so on. We have this tradition, but we need an expression in modern Ireland which deals with Ireland today, which will empower people to take the steps necessary. I'll leave it at that for a minute, let someone else in.
Thanks,
Well,
Diarmaid.
if you want to have a script, an Irish script for an Irish situation, I mean, you have the democratic programme of the first Dáil. It's there already, and it was buried.
Yeah, Barry, it's 100 years old.
Well,
So we have a modern
exactly.
definition of that.
Oh, yeah, well, I appreciate that. But the sentiment, just like the sentiment in many of the sentiment, even James Connolly's sentiments are as true today as they were 107 or 104 years ago, whatever it was that he uttered them. So just because it's old doesn't mean that it's completely of no use. In fact, some of these words, some of these scripts are very important and are educational to all of us. All of us. Now, as you point out, it might not be the best, smartest tactic in the world to be trying to sort of put these things out there and force your ideas upon people with various types of socialist and Marxist terminology. I mean, I accept that. But I mean, the scientific analysis used by Connolly, the scientific analysis used by Marx and Lenin, you cannot. It's undefeatable.
Yeah.
I mean, it has been defeated by capitalism for lots of reasons. But I mean, the sentiment within it is still good, as is the democratic programme of the first Dáil.
Yeah, true. And we wouldn't set James Connolly aside. Neither will we set Lawler aside, nor Wolfe Tone. All of these people contributed greatly, and they contributed something new in their time. The point is, and as Marx, the whole idea that Marx revealed to us, if you like, is that change is the constant factor. So 100 years since the October Revolution, or since 1916, we have to accept Ireland has changed, and it has dramatically changed. So we need to respond to that changed situation with our own modern theory, which doesn't replace and shouldn't, if it tries to replace Connolly or Pearse or Lawler or any of them going back, then we have to be concluding that they were wrong. And of course, they weren't wrong, they were right. So we have to have a modern theory which is consistent with where we've come from. And we need to add something which is enabling something that is like to go around telling everybody how brilliant James Connolly was. You'd be 100% correct. He was a brilliant mind and revolutionary and so on. But he will not bring any change to Ireland today. Nothing. It will do nothing. Instead, we need to do what Connolly did. Connolly created analysis of Ireland's situation that never had been before. He created new analysis of the situation as he found it. We need to do that today ourselves. It doesn't mean to deny Connolly or any of the others. It shouldn't. But we need something which is two-pronged. One, it empowers people and drives them to action. And two, it addresses modern society. So I'm not saying I found this, and I'm going to give it to you in a minute, but this is what people have a responsibility to do. We need to find out, well, what is this thing? And well, my thinking is it's the issue of democracy and empowerment. It's not to say we stop talking about Connolly or Marx or anybody else. There's a role for that. But there's a more pressing, urgent role, in fact, without which the rest is useless anyway. And the more pressing role is we need to build a revolutionary movement in Ireland which will take its place in bringing about national liberation in more ways than territorially, and will be part of the whole international arena of peoples who are struggling for their own empowerment and for social advance. We need to have a theory which gives that spark that people will respond to. And I think it's coming, but we need to voice that, which will be voicing the people's own demands. The people have this experience. We need to shape it and give it a modern expression.
I think you'll find that certainly the Peadar O'Donnell Socialist Republican Forum and Social Rights Ireland, the core members in the committee, maybe not everybody in a WhatsApp group, we're not talking like that. You will find that there will be no harking back to the past through rose-tinted lens, regaling ballads and stories and going to the pub after demonstrations to remember the past. Even at graveyards, it's very important. And I've many a time I've heard Barry in particular, well, of late in the last year or two, talk about, well, what would those who we are here gathered to remember want us to do today? What is
Yeah.
the charge for today? And without that message, it is meaningless. Well, maybe not mean, it's important to remember our patriots and martyrs, very important, but not just to remember, to actually focus on, okay, today, what are the issues of today? What is the social injustice of today? How can we march for Palestine up and down the hill, like you said, Diarmaid, but march over a homeless person on O'Connell Street and call them a scumbag for being like drugged to the eyeballs? It's shocking, and this is what we're seeing, and this is something that needs to be spoken about. There's a lot of purity out there, but I think that has been created through identity politics and the culture war, where, if you're not pure about everything, then you're not left. If you're not all this, you're not right. If you're a wee bit in between, you're lost, which is why we say our allegiance is to the working class. We don't get in bogged down on left or right, because that is a tool really of the state to divide us. At this point, I'd love to bring in Dara, and I think Morgan's here, although I don't see him, but he might be here. Dara, one of the pointers on one of the words, should I say, on the title that we haven't really addressed yet was the word corruption. Whether you realize it or not, everybody, we do spend a bit of time thinking about the title of these programs, because the word corruption is there, and because Diarmaid has mentioned that it's not in the interest, the system is not working in the interests of the people, as in the ordinary working class people. Whose interests are being served, and how does that come about? Is it just simply down to the capitalist system? I know you've been doing a lot of deep dives into the Epstein files. You think about corruption and depravity and all of that, and how the capitalist system actually functions and thrives to be such a violent system. Let's just, for maybe 5 minutes, talk about corruption in Ireland.
Yeah, I think with regards to say democracy under capitalism, I think it was Tommy mentioned earlier that it doesn't really exist when you understand how decisions are actually made in a capitalist system, where an analogy is thinking that democracy is one vote per person, but in a free market system, it's really a euro per vote. And if you have €1 billion, you essentially have the equivalent of 1 billion votes. When we're thinking about how these decisions are made and what the purpose really of the system is that really decisions are made first and foremost with regards to accumulation of profits. And wherever the biggest opportunities for the owners of capital to accumulate profits exist is where money will get spent. And you even see this, for example, in Ireland, where you see where government money is spent, a lot of it's spent on corporate handouts. It's spent on building infrastructure for data centers and big tech, rather than being a progressive taxation system that redistributes wealth. So when we think even, and I think it was Barry mentioned the democratic program at the first Dáil, where it's, one of the only examples in history of having a democracy in a united Ireland. I still like to use that example of democracy in Ireland and of what republicanism should be about. And I think when it comes to this idea of democracy is something that it says in the first paragraph of the democratic program is something about subverting private property to the common well-being. And this idea then of what should democracy be, and I think the debate has come up quite a lot recently, especially with regards to the use of the word dictator for anybody that's in charge of a socialist state. It was used against Maduro quite a lot, this idea of him being a dictator, where Michael Parenti describes dictatorships and democracy, and what he claims is sort of the main crime of these supposed socialist dictators is using political democracy to create economic democracy. And you see that when you have an economic democracy, what are you trying to do is essentially bring the decision making around, first and foremost, the means of production, the resources of an area, people's time, the energy, the food, etc. How are you actually making decisions around the day-to-day lives of the community in question? So when we're sort of thinking then about empowerment and what it actually means to be politically empowered is moving away from this idea, I think maybe it was Barry had said as well, of like just voting every 4 years and sort of outsourcing your political agency to one day every 4 years. And how do we sort of reintegrate politics into our daily lives is the struggle. When we look at sort of now the global capitalist system and how it operates, is like a lot of the analysis that has been done on capitalism is sort of within the national context, and that's expanded quite a lot through the neoliberal age and through imperialist analysis into this sort of idea of the economic core and the periphery, where essentially you have wealth being siphoned upwards towards the core. But what the Epstein files have really revealed is the concentration of this power into what is now a 0.01% of a hypercore, really, that's making decisions around the economic decisions on a global scale. And in the Irish context, Conor McCabe, Patrick Bresnan, and a few others, they really describe the role of the Irish comprador. James Connolly did the same thing, really, throughout Irish history. This being sort of a key part of analysing Ireland's role sort of within the capitalist system and how the government essentially act as compradors for multinationals in the global system and make decisions very much based on their needs being continued accumulation. So when we look at sort of what the struggle is about in many ways, at least in the short term with regards to the state, is trying to reorient the state back towards representing the working class and away from the multinational, really is to me where the struggle sort of exists in the fight for an economic democracy.
Thank you, Dara. Tiny, tiny elite really is overseeing and managing their puppets, or we call them during the election, coming up to the election. Diarmaid, I don't know if you saw us out protesting, we called them all Zionist puppets. Really, it doesn't matter. Like, it's like you said, the so-called social Democrats in America and the Republicans, two cheeks of the same arse, really, and Fine Gael, Fianna Fáil, but even the controlled opposition doesn't offer us a real alternative to this system under which we are suppressed and subjugated. Morgan, thanks very much, because you're the connector. You know Diarmaid, and you're based in Cork as well, and thank you for setting this up. Morgan, have you anything to add, or maybe any observations?
I don't have too much to add. I've enjoyed the discussion. It's been a very challenging one as well, which is always appreciated. As I say, I do know Diarmaid, but not very well. We've only met a few times, and I had a very great discussion with him before on the situation in Ireland and how to provide a modern interpretation of exactly the theories that you want to bring forward and what you think might be progressive at this time. I will credit him as well before I kind of make a couple of observations that he's the only part of the only group in Cork that I'm aware that commemorates the famine, one of the many mass graves in Cork as well. That's something that's largely overlooked when it comes to honouring our history, especially considering that it wasn't even 200 years ago that it happened, and the level of devastation that this country experienced at this time deserves a lot more attention, I think, in this day and age, because we spoke about it before, the need to link our history to exactly what's ongoing in the world at the moment, because as we've concluded before, we have the same enemies. In effect, they take different forms, but they are effectively the same enemies, and they have the same methods of disempowering people. To make a couple of observations on what I've already heard tonight, it's important to note that workers in Ireland are quite aware of how much power they have. Instinctively or otherwise, workers know that they have no say in how the world works, how their world works, and they don't have agency. They didn't vote for data centres, they didn't vote for BAM construction contracts, they didn't vote to become a tax haven, they didn't vote for decreasing food quality or to provide so much taxpayer money to foot the bill of the Ukraine war. To speak on something that Dara mentioned as well, it was kind of important to note that even our Doyle doesn't have that much agency. Our flavour of democracy is degenerated to such an extent that the effective rulers and policymakers have moved from Dublin to Brussels, Washington, London, Frankfurt, San Francisco, even Tel Aviv. The state merely provides the agents to enforce the policies directed from abroad. It is obviously important that we kind of not just bring that to people's attention, because people are fairly well aware of that, but to try and help them make sense of it as well, and to show that there are ways that we can empower people. It is obviously not necessarily something that you could read off a textbook. Obviously, in Ireland, we're kind of lucky. We do stand on the shoulders of giants, so we can never throw texts of Connolly away or anything like that. The older scientific definitions and theory can still provide a framework for our own interpretation of the modern world, or our own interpretation of how they should be linked to the modern world. But that requires a firm understanding of the modern world. And there are unique factors at play today that haven't been in play in any other time in known history. We do need a scientific approach to how we determine these things. One thing I will say is that when it comes to people understanding these terms, they don't necessarily need to understand these terms. They know that they don't have agency. They know they don't have sovereignty. And these are things that frustrate everyone. People think that it's a bourgeois issue about the fisheries, that the EU takes so much fish from our waters. Like, the average person understands that, and it upsets them. They're angry about it. But then you come up all these polls run by questionable agencies saying there's a 90% or an 80% favourability rating for the EU in Ireland. Like, I don't know if you can believe that. I think we should certainly help, in as much as we can, people to come to the understanding that the EU is a major problem in Ireland, in our lack of agency and our lack of sort of sovereignty, and in some of the factors that negatively affect people's quality of life here.
I have to agree with you there, Morgan. I think that when we talk about imperialism, the focus is on the US a lot of the time, and Washington and Trump, certain individuals, and there seems still to be this reticence or reluctance amongst people on the ground, to even give out about the EU, that there's still, this idea or this belief that the EU was or originally came from a peace project. There's a lot of unlearning to do because of the nature of mainstream media, which is one of our biggest enemies, another tool of the state as well, to have to constantly be analysing what mainstream media is saying and then revealing the actual truth. So I appreciate, like Diarmaid, you say people don't need the terminology, they don't need to read all the theory to understand. I actually think working class people, especially I'm living in a very working class area in Dublin, where there is a lot of poverty, and the condition of housing around here is extremely poor. And the struggle, the idea of going out to protest for the local park, to save the trees, or to save Gaza would be a ridiculous idea because people are really, really struggling. And then to start saying, let's have a Marxist club, and totally inappropriate and not understanding where people are actually at. But when you talk about the bread and butter issues, and when you talk about what's in the news, even though a lot of people are still maybe turning on the 6 o'clock news comes on at 6 o'clock because it just does, you will not get an appreciation for bullshit like you will from the working class people. They know it. They mightn't be able to explain it, but we know it. We know it. What I would find, though, in defense of understanding scientific socialism is that it helps you to understand it better and clarify it better. So that's why I wouldn't throw out the reading of James Connolly, but if it's just to regale James Connolly, then it's irrelevant. It's worthless, really. It's pointless. I think we're going to wrap up shortly. I would like to come back to you, Diarmaid, before I finish and give you the last say.
Sure, yeah. Well, thank you for the opportunity to engage. This type of engagement is badly, badly needed because there are people who have studied, there are people who have struggled with all of the issues that are concerning us all, and we need to do it together. So we need to be speaking together. We need to create, part of empowering the people of Ireland will mean we have to have people's media. So we're going to have to develop the resource to have media which competes, if you like, with the bourgeois media. And we need to start building movement amongst the working class areas on those all important issues like housing that you say. It's shocking. In a country of such huge wealth that people are scraping for fundamental needs today in Ireland is completely uncivilized. I think let's have more of this discussion. Let's encourage people to have it everywhere so that we can arrive at the theory, if you like, of the modern Irish Revolution, the thing which will bring all those disaffected communities in towns and in countryside everywhere around the coast, the fishing communities where I grew up in a fishing community. There's 2 or 3 little punts now go fishing where there used to be like 15 trawlers of decent size when I was a child. They're completely devastated. But we need this revolutionary theory, which is an empowering thing, not weighed down with the burdens of grey volumes sitting on someone's shelf. We need to have something which is lively and attractive and fashionable because it is so bright and clear and simple that it answers the question. And such a theory is not only achievable, it's necessary. We will not progress without it. So we need to shape that. And that's not to say we throw away the experience of former generations or of people like Lenin or Connolly or Wolfe Tone or any of the millions of other people worldwide who have contributed to humanity's understanding of our own condition. But we need to shape this and deal with Ireland where we are, and that will be our internationalist contribution, that we liberate Ireland, that we put together the ideas which will ignite, if you like, the people. Yeah, thank you for having the discussion. It's a long time since I did this kind of thing, but yeah, it's needed badly. Yeah. Sinead?
Yeah, thank you very much, Diarmaid. Great to have you on, and it's lovely to hear a fresh voice as well and a nice accent too. All the different accents are covered from around the 32 counties. We'll hear more of them hopefully in a wee minute. I'd like to thank Tommy McKerney, our comrade from the Pat O'Donnell Socialist Republican Forum, and Barry Murray too, who's here representing the forum. But we also have our comrades Garrod and Patricia and others from the forum here who've joined us. Thanks for being here. And to Morgan and to Diarmaid Ó'Chadla as well. Thank you for your contributions. Stephen didn't actually make it this evening. He sends his apologies, but you'll come back again, Diarmaid. We're on every Monday and you're very welcome to contribute. And you're right, unity is very, very important. So, free Ireland. A nation once,
again.